Imagine three world leaders strolling into a dusty Tehran embassy, each clutching a secret agenda, and one of them already planning to screw everyone over. What if I told you that the moment they sat down in 1943 at the Tehran Conference, they weren't just deciding how to beat Hitler, they were carving up Europe like a late-night pizza and setting the stage for the Cold War, while smiling for the cameras. Stick around, because you're about to witness how ego, war plans, and geopolitical one-upmanship collided, and how that reunion changed your world too. The cast meet the big three. Three men walked into an embassy. No, not the start of a bar joke. The punchline here involves world domination, crushed empires, and about 50 years of Cold War tension. Welcome to the most awkward group project in history. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the dreamer in the wheelchair. The President of the United States, cruising into Tehran like he's headlining the Allied World Tour, running a war and a country while hiding the fact he can barely stand unaided. FDR was America's smooth-talking optimist, part diplomat, part poker player, and full-time believer that charm could outmaneuver tanks. He wanted a new world order, not the villain speech kind, but one built on global cooperation, free trade, and America calling most of the shots. Roosevelt's secret weapon wasn't an army, it was his grin. He genuinely believed he could sweet-talk Stalin into playing nice. Spoiler, he couldn't. Still, you've got to admire the hustle. While Churchill puffed cigars and Stalin stared holes through souls, FDR played host like it was a dinner party. He made allies feel included, even while subtly dismantling the British Empire's monopoly on influence. This guy was literally rewriting the world balance of power between sips of martini. Roosevelt was the only one who hadn't met Stalin before. He was curious, almost fanboy curious. But the let's be friends approach didn't work on Uncle Joe, who saw every handshake as a power exchange. FDR arrived at Tehran like a man auditioning for global leader idol. Smooth talker, big ideals, zero patience for old empires. The man didn't just fight Nazis, he fought gravity and tradition in the same breath. Winston Churchill, the bulldog with a broken empire. Then there's Winston Churchill. Picture the cigar smoke, the Scotch glass, the booming accent that could convince you the Titanic was still a good idea. He's the symbol of defiance, yes, but also the guy quietly realizing his empire's days were numbered. By 1943, Churchill wasn't just fighting Hitler, he was fighting relevance. Britain was broke, battered and bleeding men. The US was bankrolling the war, and the Soviets had body counts that dwarfed the rest. Churchill wanted to stay in control, or at least look like he was, and he hated the idea of Stalin calling the shots in Europe. To Churchill, a Soviet-dominated East was like giving your neighbor your spare key, and then watching them move in with 20 tanks. He pushed for a Mediterranean invasion to beat the Soviets to Eastern Europe, a strategic detour through Italy and the Balkans. FDR and Stalin shot that down faster than a Spitfire. But here's what made Churchill brilliant. He still performed. He dressed every negotiation in the theatre of victory speeches and Churchillian thunder. He'd quote poets mid-argument and storm out dramatically when overruled. He didn't always win, but he made losing look noble. Churchill was the guy who brought a history book to a knife fight. A living soundbite with a cigar, half bulldog, half philosopher, fully outnumbered. Joseph Stalin, the man with the moustache and the master plan. And now, the wild card. Joseph Stalin, the quietest man in the room and easily the most terrifying. While the West was fighting for freedom, Stalin was fighting for survival, and by Tehran, he was winning. The Soviet Union had borne the brunt of Nazi fury. 20+ million casualties, entire cities vaporized. Yet by late 1943, the Red Army had turned the tide, pushing back at Stalingrad and Kursk. Stalin knew he had leverage, and he used it like a sledgehammer wrapped in velvet. At Tehran, he played psychological chess. He arrived late, made them come to him, sat under portraits of Lenin, and made the Americans and Brits feel like guests in his victory party. He cracked deadpan jokes that weren't jokes, like suggesting the mass execution of German officers, just to watch Churchill choke on his cigar. His goal: control Eastern Europe as a Soviet buffer zone, a friendly neighborhood that just happened to stretch halfway across the continent. Stalin didn't trust anyone, but he didn't need to. His army was advancing, his factories were humming, and his spies were probably already bugging the hotel rooms. Stalin didn't play poker. He played chess with live opponents. No smiles, no warmth, just a man whose every word weighed as much as a tank. The vibe in the room. Put these three together, and you've got the political equivalent of a rock band that hates each other, but still sells out arenas. Every handshake was a competition, every toast a power move. Roosevelt wanted a new world. Churchill wanted the old one back. Stalin wanted both, under his boots. Yet somehow this bizarre trio worked. Their uneasy alliance was a cocktail of charm, ego, ideology, and sheer necessity. Shaken, not stirred. So now you know the lineup: the dreamer, the bulldog, and the butcher. But why on earth did they meet in Tehran, of all places? Spoiler, it wasn't for the weather. Let's set the scene. Location, timing. Why Tehran? Why 1943? Fancy palace? Nah, they picked a Moscow embassy tucked into Iran. Talk about subtle diplomacy. Held 28. Nov. Furs. December 1943 in Tehran, Iran. Codenamed Eureka. Why there? Remote enough to keep things on the down low, yet logistically feasible. Stalin insisted. The location screams strategy and secrecy, not just about beating Hitler, but pricing in post-war power plays. The big promise: opening the second front. Operation Overlord, D-Day's cousin, born in a Persian embassy. The Allies agreed to launch the Western Front invasion of Nazi-occupied France, codename Operation Overlord, in May 1944. Stalin promised to attack from the east to relieve pressure. Why it matters. The war chessboard moved rapidly. The Eastern Front was getting baked hotter. The Western Allies committed to D-Day. Strategic gears shifted. The hidden plot, post-war blueprints. While they were planning how to kill Hitler, they were also planning how to carve up the world. Not kidding. Discussions about what happens after the war, Germany's fate, borders in Poland, Eastern Europe, and world order. Roosevelt pitched the idea of a United Nations-style organization. Stalin effectively got what he wanted: Western allies focusing west, Soviets free to look east. The Tehran Conference wasn't just about bombing Germany. It was about setting the conditions for the world order that followed. The hidden tension: not all smiles and handshakes. Smile for the photo, but behind the lens, they were stabbing each other in the back. Roosevelt-Churchill were hardly best buddies. They each had different priorities. Stalin walked in playing agenda king. He dominated. The Polish and Baltic questions? Massive fight. Why it matters. This meeting planted the seeds of the Cold War even before Germany surrendered. The alliance cracks were already showing. Iran-Turkey, the undercover game. Middle East side plot, because someone thought, hey, while we're here, let's pick those Turkey and Iran cards too. They promised to recognize Iran's independence and support its government. They discussed bringing Turkey into the war. Soviets threatened Bulgaria if Turkey entered. It wasn't just Europe on the table, it was global influence. The conversation veered well beyond Western fronts. Fun fact: wild card, the sword scene. Nothing says diplomacy like presenting a giant sword to the guy who crushed 300,000 of your enemy. Yes, really. Churchill presented Stalin with the Sword of Stalingrad, a ceremonial longsword, during the conference. Symbolic? Absolutely. Political messaging? Hook, line and sinker. Why it stands out? It shows how much image and theatre mattered, even while the world was burning. Why it all matters. The legacy. You might think this was just wartime boring meeting stuff. Wrong. This is where the future shifted. Tehran set the stage for D-Day and the final push in Europe. It laid groundwork for the Cold War. Eastern Europe's fate foreshadowed here. It shaped the post-war map and the new world order. UN, borders, alliances. Bottom line, the decisions made in Tehran still reverberate in 2025. Borders, alliances, geopolitics, all trace threads back to this summit. What if? Moment. Now imagine Stalin didn't dominate. Imagine Overlord was delayed. Imagine the Allies acted differently. Wild, right? What if the Second Front never happened when they planned? The Eastern Front might have bogged down. What if Churchill had gotten his preferred Balkan route? Different map, possibly different Cold War lines. These alternate paths show us how delicate and how intentional the moment was. Why this helps you shut down the myth. History isn't just what happened, but what could have happened. Tehran sealed a lot of those paths. Quick-fire recap, because you love a list. First meeting of the Big Three. Commitment to D-Day and Second Front. Post-war world order sketches drawn, tensions masked by diplomacy and ceremony. Iran-Turkey side deals slipped in, symbolism galore, yes, the sword. Cold War seeds planted on Soviet clay, legacy still alive in our map and alliances. If you enjoyed this turbo ride through one of the most pivotal meetings of WWII and left with a smirk and some new brain cells, click that like button. Yes, do it. Drop a comment below. Which Big Three leader do you think had the toughest job at Tehran, and why? Share this video with anyone who thinks history is boring. They need this. And of course, hit subscribe if you want history packed with sass, sharp facts, and zero snooze buttons. Until next time, stay curious, stay sarcastic, and never underestimate what happens in dusty embassies when world leaders decide your future.